New York City is kind of place that like makes you tough as nails because
Because I feel like to be, I'm always just fascinated, for folks who grow up in New York, like what was that experience like? Because for us, right, like for me growing up in Cali, like kind of we're just driven everywhere. New York's really just that wild concrete jungle. Where like, look, you gotta get to class, take the A train to go to the C train. Like there's just the whole maze of public transportation. So when were you exposed to that?
I could probably say that I took the subway before I could even formulate the idea as a kid. It's probably in part because it's I guess as a New Yorker or just growing up in New York, you can't escape the subways. Like if you're in the five boroughs, you can't not escape the subways. Even if you own a car and you drive, like you can't escape it. You have to take it. So I'd say some of my earliest memories of having taken the subway would be like pretty much at like four. I remember, and to just show you how well my age and just how far things have come. This would be like when subways were still only a couple quarters, and you exchanged your quarters, not even at kiosks, at the actual booths themselves for tokens. If I probably look somewhere, I probably still have a couple of the MTA tokens, and you'd like drop the token in the slot, and then it would turn, and then you would go through. That's some of my earliest memories of taking the subway, and of course, just New York City subways were a different kind of animal. People want to. I mean, and it's not because I don't say these things to. Before I say anything else, what I'm going to say isn't to glorify or exemplify just the violence and the craziness and chaos of the subway, but for me, it's almost like endemic to the subway. And the reason why I say this is because growing up, you would always hear stories about violence that happened on the subway. And I don't say this to be blasé about it or to normalize it or make it be something that's like accepting of it, but it's just like if you're going to take the subway, be aware of what's going on around you.
Hmm.
Like, always pay attention to your left and your rights. If you're going to be on the subway platform, like, don't stand too close to the edge. And if you have to, be aware of who's around you, how far the train is. All these little, you expect common sense things that, like, growing up as a kid, like, these things are just drilled into because you always heard stories. Like, for instance, there used to be a much larger gang presence in New York City in the 90s. So we're talking, like, Bloods and Crips because that was a whole entire movement that, as we all know, that emerged out from Cali in like the
Right.
60s and 70s. And as it transmigrated across the United States, it also manifested itself in New York City, in the inner cities. And unfortunately, the subways were used as a testing ground for many of these gangs. And I say this because you would always hear stories about slashings. That was
Hmm.
a common tactic that the gangs would use for their low level members and their initiates to be brought into the game, specifically the Bloods themselves. That was a thing where you could literally be sitting in a subway seat, minding your own business, doors open, and someone just comes out with a switchblade or a straight razor, just straight across your face for no reason, just cause. And I say these things in essence is to understand that there just need to be a certain level of critical awareness about just who's around you, how they're moving, their energy around them, whether or not they're a perceived threat or not. Because I say this because even now, like as old as I am, and as long as I've been taking the subway, I'm always aware of what's around me. People around me, who's coming on the train, who's coming off, the amount of people, how they're moving, who has a temper, who doesn't, who's acting kind of funny, who's crazy, who doesn't. These are all things that's just like at this point, it's like second nature to me. And I say this because it has its pros and its cons. The cons being that like it's almost like normalize the chaos and the violence. The pros being that like I could literally be unplugged. When I say unplugged, as in like have my headphones on, listening to music, enjoying the jam, taking the subway on the weekend, doing all kinds of like crazy switches between trains without ever having heard a message about like there being delays or anything. Just because
Right.
I know the trains and knowing like what's the chaos that's expected, I can just do it and just get to where I need to go and not bat an eyelash about it. You could see how when someone was from one neighborhood, they move differently than someone else from another neighborhood, and people generally just did their best not to mess with each other and stay in their own lanes. And yes, they had that like be about their business, like seriousness of like going to and fro, like unless it was like you ran into your old dog or your home girl and you were linking up and then y'all matching wavelengths. But generally, people just went to point A to point B, minded their own business, weren't trying to start no trouble because No, it's New York. Everyone got an uncle, everyone got an aunt, everyone got a cousin, and no one's trying to, start some beef or start some problems. New York City is kind of place that like makes you tough as nails because people won't hesitate to tell you go fuck yourself or.
They'll say it with a smile too. They're polite. They're polite. I gotta give them credit. They're polite with it. The message
Yeah,
might be a little tough, but they'll say it with a smile. They act like it's nothing to it and just go
yeah.
about their day.